With the Trump hush money trial kicking off in New York, former attorney to Stormy Daniels, Michael Avenatti, gave his thoughts in an interview on MSNBC. Unfortunately, not everyone agreed with the decision to platform someone like Avenatti. And yes, in order to do the interview, Avenatti had to call in from prison.
I think that the case is in many ways stale at this juncture. You're talking about conduct that occurred some 8 years ago. And I think that when you are going to potentially deprive tens of millions of Americans of their choice for the presidency of the United States, whether we agree with those folks or not, or regardless of what we may think of Donald Trump, I think it's a mistake to do it based on a case of this nature.
He spoke with MSNBC host Ari Melber, who has in the past faced criticism from fans and critics alike over his decision to platform certain individuals. But he caught that criticism firsthand when discussing the trial with attorney and former Watergate prosecutor Nick Akerman. But before we get to that, here is a quick refresher on Michael Avenatti. Avenatti was all over the news cycle in 2018 when he was representing Stormy Daniels in her case against Donald Trump, who was the president at the time. He portrayed himself as the guy who wasn't afraid of Donald Trump, the guy who could and would take him down. Unfortunately, his credibility and his celebrity was completely shot when he was convicted of defrauding Stormy Daniels and other clients of hundreds of thousands of dollars and embezzling millions.
Thanks to both of you for being here on a night of a newsworthy interview. Mr. Avenatti has many controversies associated with him. I asked him about those. But first and foremost, Nick, what do you think of the 2 points he makes there, that he does expect Trump to be convicted, but he also thinks there are issues in this case?
I wouldn't take his word on either of those two things. He knows nothing about this case. He was not involved in the mechanics of the case. He was not involved in the payoffs. He was not involved in how it was set up. He's not a witness in this case.
He is currently serving a 19-year prison sentence in California. Notably, Avenatti is not a witness in the current hush money trial centered around Avenatti's former client, Stormy Daniels, but Melber presumably decided to interview him given his history of working with Daniels and his understanding of the case. Also, if Avenatti was going to speak to anyone about any of this, it probably would have been to Ari Melber. Avenatti made several appearances on Melber's show The Beat back in 2018 at the height of the Stormy Daniels craze. So Nick Akerman is an attorney in New York City, but he's also a former assistant special Watergate prosecutor and a former assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. During an appearance on Melber's show following the Avenatti interview, Melber asserted that the interview was quote-unquote newsworthy before asking Akerman what he thought of Avenatti's 2 major claims. 1, that Trump will likely be convicted, and 2, that there are issues with the case. Akerman responded saying, quote, "I wouldn't take his word on either of those 2 things." He explained, referring to Avenatti, quote, "He knows nothing about this case. He was not involved in the mechanics of the case. He was not involved in the payoffs. He was not involved in how it was set up. He's not a witness in this case." Later in the interview, Akerman addressed Avenatti's dismissal of Michael Cohen's testimony. Avenatti had claimed that Cohen, Trump's former attorney and fixer who has already served time for his involvement in the hush money payment and has testified against his former boss, is still, after all of that, not a reliable witness. As Akerman pointed out, it doesn't matter whether or not Cohen has lied in the past. All that matters is whether or not he's perceived to be lying now. Between Cohen and Avenatti, one has openly repented for his crimes and one has not. One has done and is still doing what he can to atone for his past sins, and one has not and is not. Michael Cohen, who has also been a guest on Melber's show, had some thoughts on the interview, which he shared in a post on X. He wrote, quote, "Imagine that Ari Melber is scrapping the bottom of the shit barrel in bringing on Michael Avenatti by phone from prison to discuss my credibility. Let me remind you that he stole from his client Stormy Daniels and others, lied regularly about me, attempted to extort Nike, and this is their opinion expert. Just remember the $450 million Engoron civil decision stating Michael Cohen told the truth." And these responses from both Ackerman and Cohen are actually quite representative of the general audience response to the interview. Between YouTube, X, and Instagram, I haven't personally seen anyone really commending the interview. At best, people seem indifferent to it or perplexed by why it happened, but overall, the interview has been met with criticism, not just for the content of it, but also for the decision to conduct it in the first place. Ari Melber's show is currently one of the highest rated news programs on the air. Melber is generally respected by a wide audience, and his show appeals to a younger demographic than some other news programs. Still, he might have to do some damage control with this one. There is a bigger conversation here about the fact that Melber's show is on a mainstream network, and as much as we like to believe that this isn't the case, ratings matter. You have to bring in the viewers and you have to keep them. This is something that is impossible to avoid in some way, shape, or form, regardless of what platform you're on, whether you're on a major television network or if you're just on YouTube. Those numbers matter and they've got to stay up. So maybe this interview wasn't necessary, maybe nobody asked for it, maybe it reflected poorly on Ari Melber. But from a production and ratings standpoint, I can see how he came to conduct the interview in the first place. For example, Melber has had success in the past interviewing villains from MAGA world, sometimes getting them to confess to committing crimes live on the air. His interview with Peter Navarro comes to mind. And these MAGA operatives agreed to go on his show as opposed to other similar shows because the environment isn't entirely hostile and gotcha. Melber's success has often been attributed to his ability to push back against false and misleading claims made by his guests without appearing to attack them. With this Avenatti interview and in his subsequent discussion with Ackerman, general consensus is that he fell short this time, and that happens. All right, that's it for me. If you got anything out of this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and check out my podcast, Modern Context. Thanks.